up, everyone? Welcome to this week's episode of The Good Guy Drinks Whiskey. I am, as always, your host, Tim, and today I have a very special guest, Dave Allen from my favorite distillery, and a distillery that's been a hot topic among whiskey enthusiasts over the last couple of years. That is, of course, Springbank Distillery. We're going to sip through a couple of entry-level Springbanks, talk about Dave's background, a little bit about Springbank, and some more. So with that, let me go and invite Dave in. Hey, Dave, how you doing?
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for taking some time out of your day, or your night, I guess, and joining me here on this live stream.
To be sitting down at this time of hour in Campbeltown with a few drams to talk about Springbank and things in general. So the kids are in bed, my wife is in the spare room watching other TV, so I'm good to go.
All right, that is excellent, and it's a little
All right, that is excellent, and it's a little jarring to see because I know it's 9 o'clock there, but since you're so far north, it's still daylight. It's still bright and sunny where you are. That's crazy to see.
Dark until properly dark. It doesn't really get properly dark, but 11 o'clock there'll still be a bit of light outside.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So as I was mentioning, we are going to be sipping through the three entry-level whiskeys from Springbank. That is, of course, the Hazelburn 10 right here, the Springbank 10, and the Longrow Peated. Right?
Yep, and I've got the same three with me as well. So
Perfect.
Being unison. Yeah, well prepared.
Yes. All right, that is excellent. So before we jump into our first dram, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and basically how you became a rep for Springbank?
Yeah, so my current role at Springbank is the Director of Sales and Marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And I joined the company back in 2013. And a bit of, serendipity, a bit of luck got me to where I am, I suppose, into Campbeltown and Springbank. I was actually trained as a chartered surveyor. I did worked in commercial real estate, doing valuations of things like factories and office blocks and things like that, all quite boring. And I decided that's not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Nobody grows up wanting to do that sort of thing. And then I just one day found a little tiny job advert in a newspaper that I never bought before, but the headline had grabbed my attention for whatever reason as I was sort of leafing through it. There was an advert came up for regional sales manager wanted for independent family distillery. Email this, and it wasn't a Springbank email address or anything. That was very cryptic and quite mysterious. So I had a conversation with my wife and said, "God, this would be great. I'd love to whiskey. It's our national product, to be involved in sort of exporting that and be an ambassador for our national product across the globe. It sounds fascinating." And she was like, "Yeah, but it's just a shame you don't have any experience in whiskey or sales and marketing." I said, yeah, that's a good point. But you know what? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I sent off a CV kind of highlighting life experience, I suppose, is the only thing I could bring to it. And I was fortunate enough to get an interview with Springbank, and I sort of immediately clicked with the ethos. And they weren't looking for an out-and-out polished salesman. We actually don't have a lot of whiskey to sell. So they were just looking someone with a bit of integrity, which they seemed to think I had. And so I moved down from Glasgow to Campbeltown, which is the most remote town on the UK mainland. We're very isolated where we are. And my wife came down, and here we are. Sort of 9 years later. So things are going well. Mm-hmm.
Did you have any? Did you ever drink Springbank whiskey prior to actually working for them?
I tried the Springbank 10-year-old once. I had a bottle of it on a kayaking trip, and that from my first sort of memory of Springbank is being back in the youth hostel after you spent a day out kayaking, and then you sort of meet there's people from Australia or wherever there, and a bunch of us all together sharing sort of our days, stories, and experiences over at a dram with Springbanks. My first memory really of Springbank.
Yeah.
My first introduction to it. So yeah, and that's for me, that's the best way to enjoy whiskies with new people, with friends in a sort of social setting.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and that's part of the reason why I love doing these live streams, because I always find three whiskeys that I have in common with my guests, and just being able to enjoy them with somebody else always enhances the experience, without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what would you say your favorite part of the job is?
It's quite a varied role, and you do a little bit of everything. From sometimes the guys can be short in the malting. It's always the early shift, they seem to be short, so you could find yourself at 6 a.m. helping to shovel 13 tons of barley out into the malt floor.
Yeah.
But probably the favorite thing for me is probably traveling around the world and talking to people about Springbank and the company and what we do, and meeting people that have an interest in whiskey and what we do.
Yeah,
it's probably the coolest thing.
Oh yeah, without a doubt, and especially going to places and introducing it to people who hadn't experienced before. Because I mean, the first time you have Springbank is definitely a wonderful experience. I mean, it's as I mentioned in my intro, Springbank is my favorite distillery. I clicked with it immediately the first time I had it, so it's always been a treasure of mine. And I'm glad I clicked with it before the crazy Springbank Mania, which we'll get to shortly. But with that, let's have our first pour. How about the I'm guessing we'll start with the Hazelburn 10-year-old makes the most sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Hazelburn, which is our triple distilled non-peated single malt, is absolutely the place to start. So yeah, we to give you a bit of background on Hazelburn.
Absolutely.
What we do actually, probably from the very start, is we're a single distillery that produces 3 single malts by 3 different production methods. So Hazelburn is our triple distilled non-peated malt, so the lightest style that we have, and we started producing it in 1997, and it was actually Frank McCarty, who was our director of production back then, or distillery manager. He had worked at Bushmills Distillery, where they did the triple distilled Irish style of whiskey, and he thought he recognised that Springbank and Campbeltown whiskey in general is quite a robust style of whiskey. So he thought, well, if we've got three stills at Springbank, maybe we could do a triple distilled Campbeltown, have no peat into it, make it a lighter, sort of more of a introduction into the region. And it worked pretty well.
Yeah.
Whereas the 10 years old is the flagship for Hazelburn, and it's matured exclusively in ex-bourbon casks, so it sort of carries on that theme of the sort of lighter style.
And is this, so aside from being unpeated and triple distilled, are there any other differences between this and the other brands, like fermentation time or any sort of distillation difference, or is all the rest the same?
Yeah, so pretty much the only differences are the drying of the malt and the kiln. There's no peat used at all during the drying process. And when it comes to the distillation, we do a triple distillation for Hazelburn, whereas Longrow, which is heavily peated and is double distilled, and then Springbank, which we'll get to, is this kind of funny 2.5 times distillation.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk a little bit about the 2.5 times once we get to the Springbank 10. And the Hazelburn, obviously Springbank was my first introduction to the brand, and then I was curious about Longrow and Hazelburn. And the thing I noticed about this 10-year-old is that I've had 2 bottles of it. This is my second one, and each time my neck pour, the first pour right after I open the bottle, is always seemingly a little closed off, where I'm like, all right, I can tell this is Springbank, but it's just okay. And then I let it sit on the shelf for like a month or 2, and then I go for my next pour after it had a little air, and it completely transforms into this like beautiful light floral whiskey that is one that's just such unique flavor profile.
Yeah, I think it carries that sort of common theme for all the whiskey, that sort of fruity note, that fruity background. And although it's triple distilled, it's not light or thin in any way. It still has that sort of good character, that good body to it, which I think is very important.
Yeah, without a doubt. And the name Hazelburn, that was an extinct or a closed down distillery of Campbeltown from many years ago, right?
Yeah, that's right. Hazelburn Distillery closed down in the 1920s, like many of the distilleries in Campbeltown did, sort of leading up to that point. And it was a pretty big distillery. It's one of the biggest in Campbeltown at the time. And it's actually got quite an important part of sort of world whiskey heritage to it as well. There was a chap called, try and pronounce his name correctly, Masataka Takatsuru, who is basically recognised as the pioneer, the founding father of Japanese whiskey. And he actually worked at Hazelburn Distillery for a short period in the 1920s after studying a sort of a university degree in Glasgow. He then sort of took that knowledge and his newly acquired Scottish wife back to Japan and helped set up, it was first of all the Yamazaki distillery. And then his own distillery, Yoichi. So one owned now by Nika, one owned by Beam Suntory. So really the roots of Japanese whiskey, I think, it's fair to say, be traced back to this little tiny town on the peninsula on the west coast of Scotland, which I think is an incredible story.
Yeah, no, that is a really cool story. I actually read that recently about how the relationship between Hazelburn and the founder of basically Japanese whiskey, which I thought was really cool. And did this when Springbank is figuring out whether they wanted to make a new brand or make this Hazelburn distillery, did they at all try to recreate what the original Hazelburn distillery had, or was it just the naming? They just wanted to carry on the name.
Yeah, it's really we didn't really have any notes or anything like that to suggest what the original Hazelburn was, or sadly no whiskey or anything left over. So it was taking the name first and foremost and using it to keep a bit of lost history alive. And even if you were to come and visit Campbeltown today, as you sort of drive into town, you'll see the Hazelburn Business Centre. So it's now offices. So the facade of the distillery is still there, but it's now used for offices. You can see it. There's lots of buildings like that in Campbeltown that used to be distilleries or turned into, we've got the Tesco supermarket, the Co-op supermarket are now on sites of old distilleries. The petrol station next to Hazelburn Business Park was also a distillery. So there's an incredible amount of history and heritage in Campbeltown associated with the whiskey industry.
No, that's so cool. I love the deep history, and then basically how Campbeltown used to be the capital of Scotch whiskey back in the 1800s, before so many of the distilleries closed down. I mean, it has such a rich history with whiskey, and now you're down to 3 distilleries in the whole region, with a couple of more proposals coming up, I guess. But is Campbeltown, outside of Campbeltown Fest, is it a heavily touristed place? Do a lot of visitors come out there, or is it relatively pretty calm most of the year?
Visitors tend to come down to Campbeltown for one of two things, either golf or whiskey, or a combination of both. So we've got a couple of sort of exceptional golf courses down here, which draws people to come down here. But I think Springbank does more than its part of bringing people all over the world down to this tiny little town in the west coast of Scotland, which I think is incredible. And it's not too far from Islay as well, so you'll find maybe people sort of come down to spend a day or two with us, and then we'll get the ferry from Kennaicraig over to Islay. And we certainly used to see people who would just come down for an afternoon or a day at best to look at Springbank. But now, with there's so much to go on, the revival of Glen Scotia even as well, people are staying down for at least a couple of days, which is of benefit to the town, the local community, the economy. And that's kind of what we want to do, I guess. Is we don't really have any more whiskey to sell to increase turnover or anything like that. So if we can get people to come and visit us and spend their money in doing tours in our shop and in our new washback bar, it's good for us, and it's also good for the local economy as well, because people stay in hotels and B&Bs, eat out in restaurants.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great to hear. And actually, I will be going out to Campbeltown at the end of August. I'm going to do the full barley to bottle Springbank experience. So I'm very excited for that. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. Do you have any recommendations on how to maximize that whole experience?
Yeah, the barley to bottle is an outstanding tour. The feedback we've been getting from that, and I've seen online, is fantastic. It's not, it's the level of access that you're getting. I think you'll be going up ladders. You need to be quite fit to do it, I think. You're going into sort of every sort of part of the distillery, the sort of highest points, the darkest recesses of all. You're trying some drams in the warehouse. You're spending time with production teams, the malt man, the still man, and then you get your nice lunch, washback bar, and then to cap it all off, you get to sort of blend your own Springbank in our blend lab as well. So yeah, I think it's an excellent experience to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, good on you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I mean, my main motivation of going to Scotland in general is to go to the Springbank distillery. That's the highlight of the trip. So, at least the distillery is doing its job to get big fans like me out to Scotland, and just to experience the whole making of the whiskey that you love so much. Back to this Hazelburn. So what are your general thoughts of this 10-year-old? What kind of tasty notes do you get when you're sipping it?
Yes, I get quite a lot of sweetness from it. So a bit of honey, sort of milk chocolate, and sort of a slight malty note as well, and definitely that fruity characteristic. So apricots. There's a hint of that kind of marmalade and toast sort of element to it as well. I think, as you touched upon, the longer it sort of sits in the glass, those higher alcohol sort of vapors sort of drift off, and it opens up even more.
Yeah,
and changes and develops over time.
Yeah, this is one that definitely benefits with just a little breathing, because then the aromas really start coming out. It does have such a beautiful nose to it. And do you have a favorite Hazelburn release of the standard stuff that comes out?
Well, we usually do the Hazelburn 10s are standard, and every year we do a Hazelburn sherry release.
Yeah,
Hazelburn, which has been matured in Oloroso casks. But I suppose I'm balanced and probably swayed more to bourbon maturation over sherry in general. So I'd lean towards the 10-year-old, I think.
Yeah. When you get a well-aged, good quality bourbon cask, it's tough to beat the flavor profile. I mean, it's a simpler maturation than some of the sherry casks that you get, but it can really just bring out the distillate a little bit better, and it just marries with it so well. Although I do love the Oloroso releases that Springbank has. Some of those are some of the best whiskeys I've ever had. Just the way that the Oloroso marries with the Hazelburn distillate. It's really fantastic stuff.
Yeah, that's it. And I think there's something for everyone there. You have the 10-year-old exclusively in bourbon, and the sherry wood for those who sort of sway towards the sherry whiskey. So all in all, a fantastic dram, and kind of for us probably suffers slightly by sitting in the shadow of Springbank and being the sort of the sibling to Springbank.
Yeah, it definitely gets overlooked without a doubt. Hazelburn and Longrow aren't necessarily as highly sought after of the as Springbank is. Do you know which one in the portfolio is more popular between Longrow and Hazelburn?
Possibly Longrow. It's hard to say because we sell out of both. Our entire sort of annual allocation sells out anyway, but we probably have a bit more Longrow to sell than Hazelburn, so you probably say Longrow.
That makes sense. And I was reading in actually the Whiskey Malt Yearbook 2022, and it was mentioning that Springbank produces about 220,000 liters of Springbank whiskey, and then 30,000 of each Hazelburn and Longrow. Is that still kind of the standard?
Yeah, it's about that. Yeah, so pretty much spot on with that. Yeah, broadly speaking, we sort of traditionally say it's around 80% of production in Springbank, 10% Longrow, and 10% of Hazelburn approximately. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, speaking of Springbank, do you want to dip into the Springbank 10-year-old? Are you ready to jump into that one? So this one, I don't know how much you pay attention within the whiskey community, like the enthusiasts and the various Instagram, YouTube channels, all that kind of stuff. But the Springbank 10 is a legendary whiskey. People just rave about its complexity, its layered, and how fantastic this whiskey is, especially if it being an entry-level 10-year-old. And in the UK, at least, the price point, if you can get it, is extraordinarily reasonable and some of the best value in Scotch whiskey.
Yeah, I think you've it's absolutely bang on. It's a wonderful whiskey. You're right. It's robust. It's complex.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different layers to it. It's a really interesting whiskey. It's fruity, it's spicy, it's peppery, it's a little bit of smoke. It's got that maritime influence, the salinity.
Yep.
And I think you're right for our core range. The Springbank 10 is what we have the most available stocks of, so it's most easily accessible. And we're aware that there's a bit of clamour for our whiskey at the moment, but for us it's important that we price it to as much as possible to be accessible to whiskey drinkers and those who have been drinking Springbank for longer than you or I have.
Yeah.
To ensure that those people are supported and still can buy a bottle and aren't too scared to open it.
Yeah.
And has there ever... So let's talk a little bit about the Springbank Mania lately. So when I first started buying Springbank, maybe back in 2019 was when I really kind of dove into the Springbank world. It was easy to get a 10-year-old, and I'm in the US, but I would usually get it from the UK because of it's just a lot more affordable in the UK than it is in the US, which we can touch on in a minute. But and I could get the special releases like the 15-year-old rum cask or even the 17-year-old Madeira wasn't too hard to get. But now you can't buy it. Most stores don't sell them online anymore because they sell out in about a blink of the eye. And then if you want to try to buy it, you have to go to auction and pay obviously significantly more. What's kind of the reaction within Springbank, and has there been any talk about increasing production? Obviously there's a very long lag between increasing production and having more bottles on the shelf. You're looking at a decade plus for that, but what's kind of like the mentality going into that?
Yeah, so we have the same thing in the UK, and we have people queuing up pretty much every day just to get into our distillery shop to buy a Springbank. We don't have Springbank 15 available right now, or 18 or anything like that, so we have quite limited stocks ourselves. And this is the frustrating thing. We struggle to keep our own distillery shop supplied with Springbank.
Yep.
But we have conversations with people all over the world. Every importer, distributor, retailer, consumer is frustrated about how hard it is to get our whiskey right now. So yeah, we fully understand that, but we're just working with the stocks that we have available right now. We have increased production.
All right.
In 2018, we did that. So you're still waiting a few more years before that sort of comes online. And I think it's worthwhile pointing that we didn't just increase production by having sort of longer middle cuts or speeding things up. In any case, traditionally the way we've made our whiskey is we've had the same team spend around 2 months doing malting, filling all our malt bins, and then when everything was full, they would go on, do the mashing, the distillation part of it, and then fill everything, and then go back to do the malting.
Yep.
But we did the Springbank thing and just employed more people so we could have a full-time malt team and a full-time production team. So effectively, I guess, doubling output.
Yep.
So in 2028, which will be our 200-year anniversary, we'll have more stock available. But until then, I guess our production history has been quite patchy. And we're just dealing with that now. And it seems that stocks that we have, the whiskey we have available is either sort of flatlining or has dips and bumps in the road, and demand is continuing to surge.
Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. It reminds me a lot of I don't know how familiar you are with the allocated bourbon market in the United States, basically, where there are very sought after bourbons that sell out. They're almost impossible to buy, and when you can buy them, they're like 6, 7, 8 times of retail price. And that's in the UK. That's kind of where Springbank's going, where it's like, all right, it's tough to get nowadays. But it's for a good reason. I mean, in my opinion, Springbank makes the best whiskey in the world. I mean, there's nothing better than it. And you guys, I'm sure, don't want to compromise the quality to increase production. You have to make sure that you maintain that same standard. That is the reason why this demand exists. But one of the questions another question I have is kind of between the U.S. and the U.K. market. So in the U.K., Springbank releases, at least at retail, when you can get it, are very reasonably priced. Like I think the 10-year-old is roughly 35 to 40 pounds, give or take. And then when it comes over to the United States, go ahead.
Yeah, probably about sort of 42, 44 pounds in the UK
Right.
for 10, yeah.
And when it comes over to the U.S., it's priced at about $100, and it's and even before the Springbank Mania, Springbank has had one of the biggest differences between the UK market and the US market out of any whiskey out there. Do you know what's the main driver behind those increased prices in the US?
I think in the US you have your sort of 3-tier system,
Yeah.
which adds sort of layers of margin onto everything.
Yeah.
Which is difficult. There was also the trade tariffs as well. And a lot of the whiskey that's probably on the shelf right now is sort of a legacy of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose it's something for our importers work with their margins. They will tell me that the cost of shipping, even trying to get our whiskey to the States right now, is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And the cost has increased. Not even fivefold, more than that.
Yeah.
So all these things are sort of conspiring against the end bottle price, I guess. And yeah, it's a difficult one because we want our whiskey to be accessible as possible. But if the worldwide sort of logistics crisis right now, especially in the US, there's sort of no end in sight of that just now, unfortunately.
Yeah, and and just thinking about it now, the disparity probably seems a little bit bigger than it is because in the UK market at retail, Springbank is a better value than most other whiskeys. So then when you see the jump from the UK price to the United States, it's just a bigger gap than if you go to like any other distillery, the jump isn't as big, but also the entry level probably isn't as big either. So that, I'm guessing, probably has to play a bit of the role in kind of that comparison. But the good thing is, at least for right now, it is a little bit, just a touch easier to get Springbank in the United States than it is in the UK. Like I was able to get this bottle I'm drinking now online without any issue. It was, I think I paid $80 for it. So a little bit of a premium, but for me it's 100% worth it. But when you talk about the special releases like the 17-year-old Madeira, that's when you really see that upcharge. I think it was around I forget what the price was in the UK, but when it came to the United States markets, it was at like $250. It was a very jarring difference between the prices.
Yeah, and the US does get a reasonable allocation of our stocks just by having the sort of grandfather rights.
Yeah.
The US has always been one of our biggest export market, even when the demand for Springbank isn't quite what it is now.
Yeah.
So the US market has supported Springbank through the sort of more difficult times, I guess, and therefore kind of earned these sort of a good allocation. I know no market has nearly enough for the demand, but and it feels like you don't have enough in the US, but nobody has enough.
No, not right now. I mean, and at least I can have the ability to buy some of this stuff, at least the core range stuff, where I know a lot of people in the UK who absolutely love your whiskey just can't even touch it just because the demand right now is through the roof. So that's unfortunate. Hopefully in time the supply kind of meets the demand, and there can be more of an equilibrium between Springbank whiskeys and the marketplace. So speaking of Springbank, how is 2.5 times distillation achieved?
It's a good question, and a difficult one to try and explain. But essentially, we've got our three stills, and I suppose the easiest way to look at it is it's a partial triple distillation.
Okay.
So we take our wash and distill it in the first still, and then take that, distill it, and sort of split it, and some of it goes into the charger for the last still, those sort of low wines.
Yep.
And the rest of it though goes into the second still, and then we collect
Okay.
those faints, and then so we add the faints into that charger for low wines. And that combination goes through the last still, and we take that in the middle then. So yeah, it's essentially some of the spirit ends up being distilled twice, and some of it's distilled 3 times.
Yeah.
And people always ask us why do we do this funny distillation, this 2.5 times distillation, and the very honest answer is we don't know. We're simply following the recipe, if you like, the methodology that was passed down from the previous generation.
Yeah.
None of our distilling managers wants to be the guy that changes the character, the profile.
Yeah.
Of Springbank. So religiously we stick to the formula, and it seems to work.
Yeah, and it's unique. It's fun to talk about, and it just kind of adds to the identity and the mystique that is Springbank Distillery. Has there ever been a distillation of the semi-peated malted barley just twice, or triple distilled, to kind of experiment with it, or there's really no time to experiment at Springbank?
Yeah, I mean, it might have happened, but I don't know if it's been recorded anywhere or what's happened. But there's nothing in recent history that we've done like that, I suppose.
Yeah.
We're kind of focusing on making sort of Springbanks, Hazelburn, Longrow, and to try and meet the future demand, I guess. So the future me has some whiskey to actually go out and sell.
Yeah.
Without the sort of experimenting.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And if so, according to the malt whiskey yearbook, Springbank's capacity is 750,000 liters. I'm guessing you guys don't achieve. I mean, we already talked that you guys get about maybe a third to half of that. Is it probably just unfeasible to ever hit that max capacity at the distillery?
Yeah, that's one of these figures which I think someone sort of put out there, and then we've sort of kept it. But if we were to do that figure, we wouldn't be able to rely on our own malt. We'd have to buy malt, and that's one of the things. We only ever use malted barley, which has been malted within our own malt barns.
Yeah,
and we can only do a maximum of 23 tons a week, really. So that's our biggest restriction right there.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully we are still independent, still owned by the family that founded us back in 1828. So they understand the sort of the importance of keeping Springbank the way Springbank has always been. I guess making relatively small batch whiskey in a way which relies on lots of people from the local community working.
Yeah.
And we've once been described as an odd company run by odd people. And the way, if you were looking at as a purely sort of pragmatic, through sort of a business eyes, you think, oh, these guys are really inefficient. They employ far too many people to make such a small amount of whiskey. But as long as we're making enough whiskey to sell, to make enough money to cover wages, buy in the next batch of barley, casks, invest in new warehouses or new equipment or repairs or whatever, we're more than happy doing that. Mr. Wright, our chairman, who's a descendant of the guy that founded us, he's 91 now. He's seen many whiskey booms and busts.
Yeah,
he takes a very conservative approach to making whiskey, and you just make enough to sort of cover costs and sort of almost satisfy demand. And you don't want to create a whiskey lake, have lots of excess stock, which the future generation might have problems selling. So It's yes, some people, you can understand why they think that's a bit odd. Demand is so high and for whiskey, but he takes a very, very long-term approach to making whiskey. He thinks that the people of Campbeltown have been the custodians of his family's distillery for the best part of 2 centuries. So he wants to make sure that the Springbank is there for the people of Campbeltown for the next 2 centuries.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that, I mean, it's smart to make a long-term goals because the whiskey demand is cyclical, right? Right now, whiskey is the hot drink, but 10 years from now, 15 years from now, people might be into different spirits. The next generation might not want to drink what we're drinking, so you don't want to be left with lots of excess whiskey that you just can't sell like they have in the past. I mean, granted, if there ever was a Springbank whiskey lock, I would be first in line to go try to buy it all, see how much I could fit in my car before I can get out of there, because that'd be wonderful. But hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully you guys maintain a good business plan, and all the stuff that you're talking about is kind of what makes Springbank so special and so different from so many other distilleries. You're not necessarily looking for a cash grab. You're not looking for the luxury brand like a Balvenie or Macallan. You're a family run. You do everything in house, and you have unique little quirks about the distillery, and all that adds to the story and the beautifulness that is the whiskey.
Yeah, exactly that. We're as I say, we're someone else has said, we're an odd company run by odd people, and we quite like that sort of accolade, to be honest.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, doing everything from our malting all the way through to the bottling, everything on site works for us and makes us sort of stand out, I guess, from the crowd, and means people from all over the world will come down to Campbeltown to come and visit us, which is all good.
Yeah, without a doubt. And the whiskey is just it's so unique in its own right. It's not like any other whiskey out there, which makes it so special. Like, when you're drinking a Springbank, it's a Springbank. Like, even your heavily peated Longrow tastes different than other heavily peated whiskeys, which we'll get to in a second. It's just amazing what you guys are able to accomplish out there. It is just fantastic stuff. And so, any last comments on the Springbank 10 before we jump to the Longrow?
No, I think we sort of covered it sort of pretty well there. Good sort of robust, complex, good sort of Campbeltown style dram.
Yes, no, I think that's perfect. So the next one and the final dram of the night will be the Longrow Peated. So this, like you said, this is sort of like the Hazelburn. It's a little bit of the forgotten younger brother of Springbank, and I will admit I saw the Longrow heavily peated about a month or two ago on a shelf in the United States. There were 3 bottles left for $58, so that divided by 1.2-ish, so it's what, like 45 to 50 pounds. I had to buy all 3 because I felt like I'm never going to see this value again, and I love Longrow. So tell me a little bit about Longrow, the Longrow Peated. What's the story behind it?
Yeah, so Longrow Peated, it's our more heavily distilled single malt from the distillery, and it's double distilled, so sort of in the typical Scottish sort of fashion. The name Longrow comes from, again, a lost Campbeltown distillery. And actually, when you come over and see us at the end of August, our bottling hall was part of the old Longrow distillery, so it's right next door to Springbank. Yeah. And the story goes, it was first distilled in 1973, and it was actually Mr. Wright was our chairman, was putting together a blend, and he was looking for a sort of heavier style of whiskey to put into the blend to sort of bulk it up, beef it up.
Yeah.
The story goes he went over to some associates in Islay to get some peated whiskey from there, and he wasn't happy with the quality of the whiskey that was his blend. His initial sort of first draft had received some sort of pretty negative feedback. And he thought, well, it's not my whiskey that's causing this, surely, so it must be the stuff I've been elsewhere. So he thought, right, I'll make my own heavily peated whiskey here in Campbeltown. So you did that by drying the barley for the full 48 hours in the kiln by using peat fuel source
Yeah.
for the entire drying process. And that got us to around 40 to 50 ppm for the phenol count. And that's what we measure the malt as it comes out the kiln. So by the time it's gone through mashing, fermentation, distillation, spent X amount of years in cask, it's probably around a third of that in the glass. So we used to describe it as our heavily peated single malt, but if you compare it to a lot of other heavily peated whiskies, it's actually quite light in comparison.
Yeah.
It works quite well for me. I'm not a peat freak or anything like that, but the peat that we have, I think, gives us more of a sort of campfire ember, sort of smokiness, rather than this really sort of medicinal, heavy iodine type note. And I think it's a great dram. It's sort of fruity, it's creamy. The peat, it's almost like a magic trick. It's sort of quite subtle in the nose for me, and it's in the aftertaste that really sort of comes out.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about this is that even though it's your most heavily peated, like you mentioned, it's a different style of peat. You get different characteristics. Like this does not taste like an Islay whiskey at all, not even close. And it's but you can tell it's got that unique that kind of smokiness to it that is a little bit. It's more on the background than you'd expect for something that you consider peated.
And it's got a lot of American influence, a lot of it's like sitting down at the Campbeltown harbour next to the fishing boats.
Yeah.
It's got a salinity. It's an exceptional dram, really is.
Yeah, it really is, and it's like you said before, it's one of the kind of forgotten, not necessarily forgotten. No Springbank is forgotten these days, but people are more. They're going after the Springbank name more than they are the Longrow and Hazelburn, and which is fine with me because if you take the Springbank, I'll be sad, but leave me the Longrow and the Hazelburn, I will be fine with that because they have the bones of Springbank, but they offer a unique spin and they're just so unique and delicious.
Yeah, and it's a good accessible entry level whiskey. And then we have our older Longrow 18 now, a Longrow 21 there as well. The Longrow Red series that we've done is very, very popular. It's almost what we would describe as a Marmite whiskey. People love it or hate it.
Yeah.
For some people, that the concept of whiskey and red wine is just something you shouldn't do. But for me, I really, really like it. I think the sort of red wine influence, the sort of red fruit notes, the tannins, and that sort of gentle smokiness goes really, really well together.
Yeah.
It's a cask strength whiskey, so sort of double bonus there as well.
Yeah, no, without a doubt that's 100% right. The Longrow 18 is one of my all-time favorite whiskeys because it takes the peated and it settles down the peat a little bit, and then it just adds those layers from the maturation. It's just such a wonderful, well-made whiskey. And the Longrow Peated, it's how old is the whiskey? And they're probably like 7 to 8 years. Is that typically how old the whiskey is?
You're not too far off the mark with that sort of bracket.
Yeah, and which it works well with a peated whiskey. I mean, the peat kind of comes out a little bit more the younger the whiskey is, so that's a nice age for this Longrow. It's very well made.
Yeah, you're exactly right with the younger whiskey. The peat is sort of more prevalent in the younger casks, and there's a sort of good illustration of that is our sort of jumping over to our sister distillery, Glengyle.
Yeah.
We did a Kilkerran, a heavily peated.
Yeah.
When we just did an experiment to see how sort of heavily peated we could do a Kilkerran, and when we tried the spirit 18 months old, we were sort of all blown away by it, and to the point where we kind of thought maybe we're having a bit of sort of confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't as good as we thought it was. So we thought, well, the only way to sort of do this properly is do a blind tasting. So we got a load of other sort of peated whiskey, and then got people from production and sales team to do a blind tasting, rank everything. And our heavily peated spirit was in the sort of very top bracket of the whiskies we tried. And then we took it out on the road and put it into tastings. There's a little bonus dram at the end, and people are like, well, that's the best whiskey of the night. That's fantastic. You should be bottling that. And then you would tell them that it was only sort of 18 months, 24 months old, and they would go, "Oh no, yeah, I could tell it was too green." And they were trying something that was basically like 60% ABV. But it gave us the confidence to release it as a heavily peated, sort of a peat in progress series.
Yeah, and I've got two. I've got the batch 3 and the batch 4 on my shelf. Although I will admit I haven't opened them yet because I've got so many open bottles that I haven't gotten around to opening those. Are you also the sales rep of Glengyle or just Springbank?
No, Glengyle as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're very sort of closely linked. So our guys will produce at the Springbank for 9 months of the year, and then go over to Glengyle to do 3 months of Kilkerran as well. Yeah, and we have a similar problem now with Kilkerran. That it's quite hard to find a bottle anywhere.
Yeah, it is, and it's again, it's more expensive, but a little bit easier in the United States. But the Kilkerran 16, which you guys recently released, is another one of those whiskeys that just clicked with me. It reminded me a little bit of the Longrow 18 in that sense. It's a little bit more subtle, a little bit more delicate and nuanced of a whiskey, but I absolutely love that 16-year-old. In fact, I've got 2 or 3 bottles of it, and if I get another coupon from one of my whiskey shops I shop at, I'm going to get another bottle because I love the Kilkerran 16. It's such a wonderful whiskey.
Yeah, it's probably one of my favourite whiskies as well. I really like Kilkerran. Everything we do, the 12-year-old is just stand up outstanding. The 8-year-old cask strengths that we've done from the initial bourbon maturations to the latest sort of sherry and port maturations.
Yeah.
Absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, that initial 8-year-old, or the initial sherried 8-year-old, that 57.1%, that was like what launched Kilkerran into like stardom. That's when people were like, wow, this is next level great whiskey. This 57.1% Oloroso or Richard, I forget what it was, sherry cask was just such a dynamic, complex whiskey for only 8 years old, and that's when people are like, all right, Kilkerran is, the 12-year-old was already phenomenal. This is elevating that even a little bit more.
Yeah, and we take it just as it is now, but that 8-year-old, those first releases when we put out a cask strength whiskey at quite a young age and had the age statement on the bottle, people thought, well, you shouldn't be doing that. And then that wouldn't work too young. And it, especially at cask strength, it'll be quite volatile. But the proof was in the pudding. Really, it was outstanding. And we quite like this transparency of telling you that it's 8 years old.
Oh yeah,
and there's nothing to hide there at all.
No, not at all. And I think that's great that you guys decided to be transparent, because 8 years for a cask strength whiskey that's peated to some degree, that's a well-aged, that's what you need. That's the perfect balance between the youth of the peat and the whiskey, but also you get some of that, you picked the right casks for it, and that came through in the end product. I mean, it was a very, very good whiskey.
Yeah, and I had big shoes to step into, I guess, Glengyle and Kilkerran. It was the distillery that saved Campbeltown status as a whiskey region when Mr. Wright decided to revive it. It meant that we had 3 distilleries and could be recognised as a standalone whiskey region.
Yeah.
And even when it came to designing the whiskey, they could have taken the decision to make a very sort of light, fruity, floral, market appeal whiskey. But they stuck to their Campbeltown heritage, and it has that that oiliness, that heaviness, the complexity.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that that's the decision that they took at the time.
Yeah, no, that was 100% the right decision, and now they are seeing the benefit of making that decision, because it's in line with the Springbank and the Longrow and some of the whiskey that's already made there. And so now you have another distillery you can rely on to kind of produce whiskey. Not the same, obviously, but in the same, you can tell they're siblings. You can tell that these 2 distilleries are related in some fashion, and they both make phenomenal whiskey. So that just adds a little bit more to the market, a little bit more for us to enjoy. If I can't get the latest, like Hazelburn 15 and 21-year-old just came out, there is a 0% chance I will be able to get those bottles. But if I can get another Kilkerran 16, I'll be all right. At least I got something that will make me happy for a little while. So it's a good decision without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. I've enjoyed that Longrow so much. I've just poured myself another dram actually.
I know. At my last sip, I was like, "Damn, this is such a good whiskey. Like, more people need to know how good this Longrow Peated is." And it's a non-age statement, so you don't see the age on it. Maybe that scares people off, and that's fine with me because that just means more for me. But it's such a well-made whiskey. It does everything right, without a doubt.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And I think with so many non-age whiskies available, people sort of understand that
Yeah.
if the whiskey's good, the whiskey's good. It doesn't matter what age statement it has. Sometimes the age statement can be quite restrictive. If you found the best whiskey in the world but it's only 9 years old, you can't put it into your 10-year-old. So
Yeah.
on-age statement gives you more flexibility, more freedom to pick the casks that you think are right for the whiskey.
Yeah, yeah. If there's a 6-year-old whiskey that you feel like is ready to be bottled and mixed with maybe a 10-year-old whiskey, then why if you think you're going to scare people off with a 6-year-old age statement, then just make it non-age statement and let the product speak for itself, which in this case it absolutely does. And I'm very happy that I've got a couple of spare bottles behind me here. And you can, I don't know if you can see how well you can see, but I've got my Springbanks are always on display. I've got the Longrow Reds. I've got the
The red line up, yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, I've got the Madeira 17.
The Madeira and the Hazelburn.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got the Springbank green 13-year-old.
Yeah.
So you can see I'm a huge Springbank fan. Now I'm glad I was able to stock up on these when they were still accessible to me, and it'll keep me afloat until production catches up to the demand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually just bought my first whiskey on auction like a few days ago. I overspent, obviously, because it's auction. But of the 4 bottles I bought, 3 were Springbank or Springbank related. I got a Longrow 11-year-old cask strength that was matured in Portwood, which just fascinated me. I'm excited to try that one. I got a distillery hand-filled Longrow, and then the Campbeltown lock that just came out recently. So those are my 3 Campbeltowns that I got.
Okay. We will hopefully have some Campbeltown lock in the US before the end of this year as well. Won't need to rely on an auction.
Yeah, that'll be great, because that was one that really interested me, especially at the price point, because it was a blend between the 3 Campbeltown distilleries, which is very intriguing, and so that will be something I'm looking forward to try once it arrives.
Yeah, and we were able to source a good volume of Glen Scotia, and we're able to put a good component of our own whiskies and Hazelburn, Springbank, Longrow, and Kilkerran into it. So it's a true Campbeltown blended malt.
Let me. So we're getting close to the end here. I've got a few questions for you. Just for fun. When you're not drinking Glengyle or Springbank whiskey, what is your next whiskey of choice?
Well, that's a difficult one. We've got so many whiskies ourselves.
And if the answer is none, you just stick to your own profile. That's fine too.
No, I'm trying to be honest. I'm trying to get my got over on the shelf over there.
I suppose you can't go wrong with a Kilholman or something like that, or an Arran. Fantastic whiskies, or even some of the newer sort of Glenallachys.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to pick, a whiskey. There's so many good whiskies out there right now.
Yeah, no, there really is too many good whiskeys out there, and you just named 3 whiskeys that are very high on all whiskey enthusiast lists. People love Billy Walker's Glenallachie releases. They love Kilholman, because Kilholman's kind of in the vein of Springbank. They do a lot of stuff locally. They do a lot of stuff with small production and whatnot, so it's got some similar vibes there. And then Arran has that unique flavor profile that just makes it a very nice whiskey. So those are all great choices that will make any whiskey enthusiast still watching very, very happy. What's your favorite type of cask maturation? I know we mentioned bourbon before, but is that your favorite?
And I'll probably stick to my guns with that. I think Springbank and bourbon is on on balance, my favourite sort of maturation style. First fill bourbon and Springbank goes pretty well together. And we've got we've actually got some willet casks.
Oh yeah.
So there's some Springbank currently maturing in willet. So it's only the spirit's just gone into that, or we've put some older whiskey into it as well. So I'll be looking forward to seeing how those are developing.
Yeah, no, that'll be super interesting to try and taste as it develops in those casks. And very cool that you're in Campbeltown. You can go to the distillery and taste this stuff that the rest of us just can dream about. I don't know if you can answer this question, but I had somebody ask if you can name the cask makeup for the new 30-year-old that just got released or that's about to be released.
I can probably do a pretty accurate job of that. So there was 6 casks that went into that, 5 refill bourbon and 1 sort of refill sherry. All are also casks as well. Yeah.
So it's pretty straightforward maturation.
Yeah, well, it sounds fairly straightforward, but we don't have a lot of older casks of Springbank.
Yeah.
So we have quite a small pool of casks to draw from. Maybe a total of 15 casks, and then sort of whittle that down. It was really sort of 12 we were looking at, and thankfully the whiskey in those casks were pretty good. And this is the first time we've released such an old Springbank, a 30-year-old. Since 1999, we released something as part of the Millennium series, and there's a weight of expectation. These bottles, they're so rare. There's maybe 1,400 bottles in the world of this first release, and if people ever do open them, which hopefully they will, it's going to be maybe for the birth of a child, a grandchild, or a celebration of a marriage or something like that. So, you don't want them to go, oh,
yeah,
worth it, yeah.
No,
so, I'm a little bit biased because I helped put it together, but it's a fantastic whiskey. It was myself, Finlay Ross, our director of production, and Ranald Watson, who's our sort of group director of sales and marketing, sort of got round the table and had the very difficult task of sort of going through these casks and then sort of putting different things together to see how it all worked and was put together. And undoubtedly, I think it's an outstanding whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, when you describe a 30-year-old Springbank as pretty good, that's probably the understatement of the century right there. I'm sure it is exceptional. I'm sure it must have been real tough to have to taste this very old, matured Springbank and kind of decide what would blend together well to make this phenomenal 30-year-old. So, and that's obviously a whiskey that is just going to be a dream for most of us Springbank enthusiasts. It's going to be something that we'll never be able to touch, but it's very cool that you guys are able to put that out there and put it to market, even if it's not accessible to most of us. It's still just a mark of like something that's so cool.
Well, when you're over at the end of August, you'll be able to buy the dram in our washback bar or on site. Right. So you'll be able to try it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. If it's still there at the end of August, that will, without a doubt, be on my order list. That'll be so cool to be able to experience that in Campbeltown at the distillery. There's not going to be a better experience than that. I'm doing when we go to Scotland, we're going to travel around the island or the whole country, but we're going to make sure we're going to Campbeltown first because I don't want to be like whiskey exhausted by the time I get to Springbank. I wanted to be on my A game and be able to taste everything before I go to all these other distilleries. So I'm super pumped to be able to experience that.
Ideal.
Somebody else wants to know if there are any special Springbanks coming out. Like you have the 17-year-old Madeira, the 15-year-old Rumwood. Are there plans for any recent, I guess, or soon to be releases for Springbank? If you can answer that question.
Yeah. So where are we now? There should be the Hazelburn 21-year-old heading over to the US, and it's been released here. The Springbank 30 has just been released. The Hazelburn Sherrywood, a Kilkerran Peated Progress 6 are the kind of next, or are just been made available really in the UK, Europe, and whenever we can find a container on a container ship that's going to America, it will arrive in the US maybe in 6 months' time.
Yeah. Yeah. Always a little bit of a lag between the two releases.
Yeah, and then I guess the next kind of project where we're looking at is a sherry series, where we have a Springbank currently maturing and a variety of different styles of sherries.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be a release every year for the next, must be the next 5 years.
Okay.
So the first release will be a PX cask that was spent 7 years in bourbon and then 3 years in PX. And then the following year it'll be something like the Palo Cortado. We'll work our way to the lighter end of the sherry spectrum.
I know.
Are these going to be at cask strength, or are they going to be at 46?
No, they'll be at cask strength. Yeah.
Oh,
that's going to be phenomenal. I mean,
those
will sell out.
Given
the latest mania for Springbank, your job must be pretty easy now, right? Because the stuff is released and it's sold, and that's your job. You're done.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. That's what it is. It's a good problem to have, but it's a difficult thing to do. I think our biggest problem is the sort of love of Springbanks turn into almost a tide of resentment as people struggle to find our whiskey and get really cheesed off when they've not been able to buy a bottle of something, but then see it on an auction website for 5 times the retail price. And but a better problem to have than the other way around. Definitely.
Yeah, that where you couldn't sell it at all. No, it's definitely but there's really what else can you do? I mean, at least the bottle will get into some people's hands that actually are going to open it and drink it and enjoy it and not profit for it. And then people who buy it to sell it on auction, that's a source of income for them. I mean, it's free markets. I guess they do what they have to do.
And I guess we don't export to every country in the world.
Yeah.
And if you live somewhere that we don't export to, maybe the auction websites are the only way that you can sort of physically get a bottle without actually flying to Campbeltown and buying something from the shop. So, yeah, I mean, you can see that there is a market there for it.
Yeah, no. Another reason why we're going to Campbeltown first is because I'm allowed, I think, 700 or 500 milliliters, or I forget what the number is. 7 liters of whiskey, I think I can bring out, or 5 liters of whiskey. And I'm pretty sure I'm gonna max out my allotment that I can carry back home with me at the Springbank distillery. So I fully anticipate getting my 5-6 bottles that I can bring back to the U.S. all at the Springbank. Because I know it's so challenging to get nowadays. I'm not gonna mess around with these other distilleries. I'm just gonna focus on getting the stuff that I love. So
your bottle from the end of your barrel to bottle.
Yep.
There's 1 bottle straight off.
Yeah, I've already counted that in, so I'm already 1 down, and we'll see what other gems I can find at the distillery and at the Caden Heads as well. All right, so I've got a couple more questions for you before I let you go. The next one: if you had to pick just 1 bottle of whiskey to drink for the rest of your life, which bottle of whiskey are you picking?
Man, this is hard, but
that's not an easy question.
I'm just going to say Springbank 10 for a variety of reasons. It's a great whiskey. It's fantastic whiskey. It's sort of complex. There's lots going on. But it was my sort of first introduction to Springbank and Campbeltown whiskey and good memories. So, yeah, I'll say Springbank 10.
Oh, that's a perfect answer too.
And it's one that I can afford to keep drinking maybe for the rest of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and like we mentioned before, it delivers so well on everything that you really can't go wrong. It could almost be described as the perfect whiskey. It's matured long enough. It's got just gentle peat. It's got the right cask makeup. It's just such a beautiful whiskey. All right, so your last question of the night before I let you go. I know it's getting late there. If you had to share a dram of whiskey with 4 famous people, dead or alive, which 4 people are you picking?
Oh, man.
I know. They get a little challenging towards the end here.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say number 1, my grandfather, who passed away when I was quite young, but you know, sounds like he had a pretty interesting life. Lots of old war stories. Catch up with the drama. I always remember him. He had an eye patch. He only had one eye.
Yeah.
He lost an eye during the war. So that sounds like pretty interesting.
Absolutely.
There's a footballer. You'd say a soccer player. Alan McCoy over here, sort of famous Scottish footballer. Is a bit of a legend over here. So him as well. Who else? My wife, in case she watches this back.
You got to cover your bases. Well done.
Yeah. God, one last one.
Hulk Hogan.
All right, I like that. Out of left field, you've got this one, this intellectual lineup, and then you got boom, Hulk Hogan to round it out the table. That's great. No, that's the perfect answer. And you like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode here, there's nothing better than to enjoy a dram of whiskey with good people and a good conversation. So that's a great table. And again, tonight, being able to drink these 3 Springbank whiskeys with you, somebody who works there, was definitely a privilege of mine. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day and joining me here on tonight.
Oh, it's always a lot of fun, Tim, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're around in Campbeltown when we're out there, I'll reach out to you on the DMs. And if you want to meet up for a drink or a lunch or something, I'm going to be with a few other people. If you're available, that would be great to meet you in person.
Yeah, we'll do that, definitely.
All right. So I'm going to let you go for the night. I appreciate it again. Thank you for joining me here tonight, and I hope you have a good night.
Cheers.
All right. Cheers. Yes, Slanja.